we recorded with you a couple weeks ago, and it was funny because I did an intro for our video on Friday, and I was driving home Friday. I had this thought come to my mind, like the reality of AI right now is that by the time we publish your video, which is going to be like a week or two after we recorded it, it will be wildly outdated, or something will have happened to have blown up everything. And so we are doing an emergency update to our conversation in light of DeepSeek.
And in light of DeepSeek, but also there have been so many other updates too. So it's crazy.
Okay, walk us through it. What's going on?
AI is crazy, but this is a particularly crazy, let's call it last week. Someone actually just told me, like, Gemini's model came out too. And I was like, that didn't even make the news. That just speaks to how crazy it is right now. So the reason you reached out and, the reason I was on TV today is all things DeepSeek. So what we know, China beat the US, right? This is the Sputnik moment. If you listen to Mark Andreessen, the space race is on. Tech stocks are at massive sell-off. NVIDIA, market cap is plummeting. And my sort of macro message is, non-investment advice, but buy the dip. I think overall, I think the TAM just increases here. The big companies, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics of the world, AGI is the goal. My team only talks about ASI, forget AGI. Super intelligence is the goal. To get there, no one can take their foot off the gas. Spending will continue. At the same time, every business ROI calculation just changed overnight, and that's not just because of DeepSeek, but also because of what will now happen to the cost curve. The cost curve will come down tremendously. There's going to be a ton of fast follow. Consumers and businesses are going to be the ones that benefit, and the way they benefit is by being able to now afford to build more AI features and to be more AI enabled. So
what's going to drive that cost compression or the compression of the cost curve in that, part of the Sputnik moment was like, now there's a space race. We need to throw as much and as many resources, especially financial ones, at this problem. But part of the DeepSeek message and part of why people were selling off NVIDIA was like, wait a minute, this takes way fewer resources. The cost to do this stuff is actually going to fall through the floor, which I think then highlights the point you made, which is like suddenly this makes it accessible to everyone in a way that it hadn't before.
Yeah. It's funny, I agree with parts of that and disagree with parts of that. And I think this is where the interesting nuance is. Maybe let's just take it sort of apart. What happened? China was limited, right? They didn't have as much. Oh.
I'm saying limited. Yeah, sure. I mean, right? I think there's been a lot of debate around how cheap this thing actually was, right?
I think that's right. So one, we don't know, right? We're taking a story. But let's say it's true. Sure. I think we can all believe scarcity drives innovation, right? That makes sense. So what I've heard from, call it, the leading US AI companies is that the techniques are not novel here. These are not things that they don't know how to do. In this case, it was China or DeepSeek optimizing for different things. In their case, optimizing for two things: cost and open source. OpenAI, Anthropic are closed and admittedly optimizing less for cost, probably because they can. Well, the reason I think that the equation changes overnight is because they no longer can. I don't think it's this great fundamental thing, although there is a lot to learn. But more than anything, I think this puts a lot of pressure on the need to release cheaper models that also have low latency. And I think that that's what I would expect we see the big model companies release in the near future. I mean, Sam Altman tweeted this last night. Hey, one, it's really fun to have a competitor. That was that was great, good energy. And two, we're just going to pull up some releases we already had planned, right? Signaling this isn't new, it's just different and in a different order. Look, there is going to be some truth to all of these different dynamics. The pressure and the competition is what's going to drive that cost curve to come down almost more than the innovation.
And are you saying that when vendors compete, customers win?
I am. I think in this case, it's sort of fascinating, right?
Totally fascinating.
Customers, consumers, and businesses. Like, I think this now changes the equation for every layer of the economy besides the hyperscalers. So, where has value accrued to date? To the hyperscalers and the model companies. Where did we all think the value would accrue? Lots of places. Well, guess what? Now it's going to accrue lots of places. So, companies that before had to be really choosy about where they were investing in AI and where that ROI calculation really laddered up. Well, now, like, the I in ROI has changed dramatically. And so use cases that might have been out of reach, forcing them to focus on the highest value use cases, are now in reach. So now they can just do all of this. Is sort of my argument that, like, this is like adding a lane on a highway. It's like the TAM only grows here, traffic only increases, the AI adoption is now going to massively accelerate. And I think the really cool thing for the market is that now AI use cases can balloon and expand so much, because we're still learning about where there's actually real value from this technology for businesses. Like, this has been the year of ROI. I think we talked about that when we spoke just 2 weeks ago. That's still true. It's just that the likelihood of reaching that ROI has just gone up a lot.
Have your conversations with customers changed at all in the last few days?
I think the theme is urgency. I think everyone right now feels urgency. I love, like, we just talked about competition, is good for consumers. Well, like, that is driving urgency from the big players to meet the demands of now the developers who otherwise going to go build on the cheaper model. So for companies, the same is true. Urgency is the theme. We're on conversations with our customers, call it the CTOs or the CEOs, who are still saying, like, my team is not scared enough. They're not acting fast enough. Well, like, this is another moment to massively accelerate things, because it really is, like, so much is changing that if you are now just getting started, like, you're already playing from behind. If you've been experimenting, if you've already seen value, if you now can prioritize things that you had to deprioritize before, you're, like, already 10 steps ahead. This is the urgency, the need to be in the game, the need to be innovating, the need to really be developing your company-specific POV on where there's going to be value in AI, and be able to adapt to these changes, because I can guarantee this will not be the last one. I anticipate that actually things are going to massively accelerate from here.
How do you develop a POV as a company, as a division within a company, when the sand is shifting at the rate that it's shifting right now? I mean, literally, this was like, Stargate was what, Friday? There's got to be people who are saying maybe the answer is just let the dust settle here.
Let the dust settle and you will not have a company. Like, it's great. It just depends what you're optimizing for. I think it's, like, the most ridiculous stance to take. There is so much for these companies to gain. I'm talking to you from this tiny phone room because I'm on site right now with 20 companies, all legacy companies, all exploring very real ways that they can be applying AI and Gen AI to their business, all with very clear ROI. As the investment that it takes to run these things goes down, that, like, return is only going to go up. So, like, this is so dramatic for the cost takeout play, for companies to be running more efficiently and, play to the bottom line. And then also for the top line. Like, this now enables so much development at scale and innovation that you can run across a massive customer base. The upside is massive. And I think that, just as we've now seen urgency and pressure, that's going to get real. I was hearing sort of, as I was preparing to go on Bloomberg today, watching a few interviews, and everyone's still talking about, like, the boardroom, right? What's your AI strategy? That was what I was saying, like, 2 years ago. Well, now, like, those boardroom conversations are going to be, like, there's a company that I'm also on the board of that just took, $10 million out of their cost structure using AI across these, dimensions or these functions in their company. Like, what are you doing about it? Like, how are you getting that? It's not going to be what's your AI strategy. Like, we're going to leapfrog so fast. And so if companies aren't moving, the gap's going to widen.
How do you translate the enthusiasm and the anxiety that maybe some of the executives are feeling into something practical and hands-on Like, what's a first step, a first or a second step that someone can take if they are feeling behind the 8 ball here?
First step, hire tribe.
There you go.
Second step, hire tribe. This is why we exist. So we're here, we have a scalable model that we can.
How would someone get in touch with you?
Send me a direct email, Jacqueline@tribe.ai, or go to our website. But any friend of Bryce is a friend of mine. I actually think we should talk about Operator.
Geez, that's right. Operator launched since we last.
So not even since we last spoke, since Friday.
Literally.
So Friday night, our team pulled an all-nighter to get DeepSeek into our tooling. In the meantime, Operator was released Friday middle of the day. What Operator is, I think, is really game-changing for companies. It's really workflow automation. The way I think about it is any task you might have offloaded to a junior team member or to an overseas team member, this is something that can now be automated. So you can take a video recording of your screen running through a documented process, and you could give Operator a prompt to go do this, hundreds, thousands, bazillions of times, generate a list of candidates, actually reach out to those candidates, actually not just give you back information, but take action on your behalf. And it's optimizing for the pixels on your screen.
Wow.
So this
Did your team find that it was delivered on the promise?
We're still playing around, but it's clear that this is, to me, the future of RPA. Right? This is sort of the move to agents, the move to from process automation to workflow automation. And we're moving from sort of human to agent to eventually you're going to be agent to agent. I think that this is another really massive shift in the ecosystem, and people were just wrapping their heads around it when this whole new thing happened, and now we've all forgotten this already. And so neither is going away. But I think with OpenAI and Sam now saying they're going to make a bunch of new releases soon that are on the model side, the API side, we're going to have innovation happening in parallel, or maybe we actually see sort of Operator get deprioritized while the model race is on. So there's a lot of really interesting pieces.
So when you sit down with these 20 people, these 20 CIOs or whoever, these big companies today, what is your message to them? What are you trying to get them to see or understand?
Everyone's looking for the same thing, which is on-the-ground insights. We are seeing so much happening by building hundreds of AI products with mid-market and mostly enterprise companies. They want to understand what's working and not working, where and how, and most importantly, how can they get it? Right? How can they accrue the value for themselves? And so that's really the conversation is focused on. What are those learnings? What are the case studies that are really moving the needle? And how do those either apply to them, or are there other solutions that apply to them that could really align with big drivers in their business? So these sort of 8 to 9 figure plus opportunities to really either grow top line or streamline costs. And then I think on the model side, there are conversations that we're having because we're an agnostic player that they don't get to have with customers. Of course, they're sort of seeing their lens, conversations around their ecosystem. And I think it's really helpful to have a view from someone like Tribe, which can say hey, here's what's happening when you're not in the room. Here are the things that customers are looking for. I would have been able to tell you, they really care about cost. And maybe that's one of the reasons we would choose an open source model over going with you guys, a closed model provider. Here's where we're seeing tremendous demand in this moment. Or customers really want this type of a solution, but actually we don't have a really great answer for them. Is that something we could co-develop together? So how can we really look at the trends that are happening in the market? How can we really be and verbalize for them the voice of the customer? And then how can we use it to advance enterprise AI and the solutions we're bringing to the market, and therefore the value that we're bringing to our customers as well?
Anything else you want to cover?
We talked about when we met last how Llama and Meta kind of weren't in our first conversation or are now very much in our conversation today. I think that now is going to accelerate as well as demand for open source models really increases. And they're the company that has really staked their claim to open source. So I think probably actually two things will change. One is increased demand for open source and increased openness to open source. And then I think the second is more like running locally, perhaps some more on-prem AI, which I think is another interesting dimension to think about from, security and when you're talking about international models and all kinds of other things.
Interestingly, Operator, the example that they used on their website was from one of our portfolio companies, which is called HipCamp. What they showed was trying to book a property that was offline. So you couldn't actually book them offline. So it ended up taking the request and then generating a voice call to the owner of the property. They handle all of the booking via AI voice agent and then send them back to the online experience with a confirmation. So it does feel like voice, especially in this agentic world, has a very different, much wider use case.
Yeah, the way I tend to think about it is right now we're really talking about automating the way we do work today and automating experiences that look a lot like the consumer and B2B experiences that we have today. I think that is still like step zero. And the real advances are going to come when we really have these novel ways to interact. There's no way that chatbot is the only UI innovation in AI. So I think, you're starting to look at things like Operator, which could kind of signal where we're going. And I think voice also could signal where we're going. So really starting to think about what does it look like for every person to have AI embedded into their lives? What does it look like to have an AI coach? What does it look like to have an AI admin? How do you engage with these things? Where do they live? What do they look like? What do they feel like? The closest thing that is here today that seems the most interesting and ripe for innovation is voice. It's something that I think, my gosh, I voicemails are the bane of my existence. So it takes something that's like, has been very analog, very legacy, and very painful. Very few younger generations want to actually pick up the phone and call someone. And I think it's going to flip that because the value and the automation potential is going to go from a painful experience like call centers and being stuck in those phone trees to something that's really delightful. And I think we're just starting to get glimpses of what that looks like. The easiest example is we built a feature for and with MyFitnessPal where, it's January, so dieting time. One of the most painful parts of using an app like that is cataloging what you ate every day and trying to figure out, how it maps to that data catalog of, 8,000 entries for a blueberry muffin. How big is the muffin, whatever it is. This was one of the reasons users wouldn't log into the app. It's one of the reasons that users churned. Overall, one of the most negative pieces of feedback a consumer could have. So we took that experience and instead created a voice logging capability. So you can now talk to the app like you're talking to a friend. I had a matcha latte today with almond milk. The almond milk was kind of sweetened. I had a blueberry muffin. It was about the size of my hand. It, was from a company like this. And then I had lunch that looked like whatever, with dressing on the side and blah, blah, blah. Well, I just talked to that thing that took no time. And we created the automations for it to automatically connect to the data catalog and actually choose the right results. And you can really go back and forth and have this iterative experience to make sure you get the right result. But actually, in my experience, it works right away. So that's something that was a user pain that is now this delightful experience that they launched only for premium users because it feels so special and so different from what has existed in the past. And that's here today. So that just sort of signals, I think, where some of the innovation can go in consumer and experiences.
I love it. If someone wants to create those, someone who's feeling behind the eight ball, feeling flat-footed, maybe looks around and feels the urgency, but may not have exactly the team or the resources to deliver on this promise, how would they engage with Tribe?
Yeah, I know you're smiling, but I really can be objective.
I know.
The way I think about it is today, the barriers to getting leverage out of this technology are too high. You need the people, By the way, those people are really expensive. You need expertise around AI, product development, iterative, best-in-class product development, not just the AI expertise. And then you need to be able to optimize for a variety of these different features and navigate the shifting sands of this crazy, maddening landscape. And so we've done a few things. One is we have the people. We have over 600 AI engineers and product developers. We also have the tooling. We've built up a bunch of pre-built components for a lot of these common use cases and have the platform on which we can accelerate development of these AI products and features. And then the third is we are an agnostic player in the market. We've built our tooling to be interoperable, to be modular and multi-model so that we can continue to optimize for the best model for the best use case and what the team, the ultimate customer, is optimizing for. And so what we're bringing to the table is that end-to-end expertise from AI strategy through to hands-on keyboard building and then getting that thing from testing into production, integrated into your systems and with your data so that you can actually get results from these things.
Wow, you must feel really great about the position you're in as a business.
I think these are the moments when it becomes so clear that it's what's clear to me. The world is not static. I think we kind of continue to fall into these myths that there's been so much change and we're in this static place, and it's because we're still so early. So the landscape's not slowing down anytime soon. Competition, it's still deeply anyone's game, and I think it just got a lot more interesting. And more than anything, the value prop for businesses just got so much more interesting. That ROI calculation really matters. Companies can't put in a ton of, upfront investment without seeing that return. So every company that I'm on site with today is talking about a payback within months, certainly within the first year. You're not talking about companies funding, millions of dollars to get to value, and that's only going to continue to go down. And I think that that's going to be a really exciting flywheel and accelerant for this market.
So now that we've done the update, now you can listen to all this outdated information on how we thought the year was going to play out.
I mean, I actually genuinely think it all stands. All true, and all of those things only got more true and more interesting.
Oh my gosh. She did it better than we could ever do it.
I think we should start where we left off last time with POC.
POC purgatory. I love that phrase.
Yeah, I think it really was POC mania, and then it became POC purgatory.
So explain that contrast.
Yeah.
Mania to purgatory.
Mania, I think where we were last time we spoke was every company was looking for a thing in AI they could just turn on. And I think this is actually why GPT Enterprise took off so much. It was an easy product that was SaaS-like that companies could buy and then have an answer to their board, to their CEO. We're doing something in AI. The same became true for POCs. Yeah, of course we're doing things in AI. We're doing a POC. There were companies that I spoke to where in advance of a workshop, and workshops became this motion by which we churned out tons of POCs. We can talk about that in a bit, but in advance we had kind of a prep call with a company, and I said, so, what are your goals for this quarter? What is it you're trying to do? And then how can AI ladder up to that? They said, oh, that's easy. My OKR for the quarter is to do a Gen AI POC. And to me, that's just the perfect story. That is exactly what went wrong. Of course, then these things aren't going to move to production because you have people making decisions for all the wrong reasons. What ended up happening? Any number of things, but probably the simplest is the use case that people built a POC against wasn't sufficiently valuable to justify the cost.
Was there a theme to the POCs that you were seeing in terms of the use cases that they wanted to go after?
There were a few, but I think one of our big takeaways was that a lot of the times the POC work was happening at, call it, a level or two below the CTO or the CPO. And the ideas that we were focused on automating just weren't big enough. And so then you bring that kind of case. So the point of a POC is to prove the concept, right? Like prove this can work. So you then go prove it can work. You bring the case for what it takes to go build that out into production, bring it to market. And you bring that case to the CEO or to the board. Like, why would we do this? Right?
This is where it flips from POC mania to POC purgatory.
Yeah. And so now it becomes a graveyard.
Were there any interesting takeaways from like low value POCs where they really were kind of dead ends? And in terms of like red flag or a warning sign to people who are engaging, like this is a dead end street.
That is what I am very interested in. We've definitely made lots of gains there. There's kind of like, what's the standard rate of POC to production conversion? We're kind of operating above 3x the market today on that conversion rate, which is really important for our business, but also really important for our customers, because if they don't get things in production, they get zero value from AI. And so our goal is always to deliver as much value to our customers as possible. Maybe I'll say the controversial thing first. I think it's possible the answer is to stop talking about POCs.
Why is that controversial?
It isn't. It's just been the language, right? I think no one knew how to do this stuff. And so you were trying to convince people that it worked, that it wasn't just hype. That's kind of, I think, why we ended up with POCs. But it doesn't necessarily mean that's the answer to get a company on the path to investment. And so what actually is, it's really trying to figure out what is that thing at scale that would be sufficiently valuable for their business. And then, what are the right milestones along the way to get them on a path for true investment? So let's say we can take millions of dollars of cost out of your engineering organization. Well, then you probably don't care if you're spending millions of dollars to build it, as long as the ROI is sufficiently positive and will continue to scale. So, how can we really make these cases for what does this look like at scale? What's going to be sufficiently valuable to really move the needle and propel a business forward? And then how do we go start on that journey together, but with that kind of commitment up front?
Is it a different engagement mode for you as a kind of service forward business versus a product forward business in terms of how to approach that POC or that customer, like that sales motion is different?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think for larger companies, they're still trying to figure out what to do. Yeah. And so I think the problem is we all got so tactical. That the problem was no one knew how to do it or knew where there was value. But actually, that's the bigger question, is where's their value? And so we now spend a lot of time, they're very consultant-y words, but doing these strategy engagements of trying to figure out with companies as their partner, where is their value? What does their AI roadmap actually look like? And not having that be, a few hours in a workshop that then just gets us to a POC as fast as possible, but actually investing up front in those kinds of conversations, that level of research, that level of user testing, so that you can go build the right things.
That has to be so frustrating for a product person, though. Like, I have to sit in here and hold your hand through all this, like, put your credit card in and just go, is what most people want in the
market is just so not there. Yeah. I think what's really cool is OpenAI and all of these companies, Anthropic, all the hyperscalers, they're growing like crazy despite this. Yeah. But that unlock, AI is not a product people can buy yet. There are a few examples of products people can buy. And I also think our frameworks are going to change as the solutions around AI become more crystallized.
How so?
I think that is very much one of the interesting questions. But I think we're still operating in this paradigm of SaaS. And I think AI blows up SaaS in many ways. And so I think the sort of simplest way to think about it is today, companies have needs all over their business. That's really overwhelming to think about needing to really build solutions across every area, every function, and your product-facing features. And companies aren't used to doing that. They're used to buying software solutions. And so today, I think there's a real movement in enterprise to buy vertical SaaS, particularly for internal use cases.
Okay.
And then what I think probably happens is that these companies get tired being wedded to these roadmaps that aren't tied to their businesses. They sort of see where the gaps are. They need ongoing, much deeper customization, and then probably move away from these tools because it's only getting easier to build. But I don't think it's the case that happens right out of the gate. I think there will be some kind of transition period.
That would be a massive, massive shift from how people have built and deployed or purchased and deployed software.
Yeah,
right?
I think this is a true platform shift moment, and I think the ripple effects will be massive across every area of how we build, the frameworks we use for what successful companies look like, what that means for talent within organizations, the roles people play within organizations, what leaders come to expect, and what becomes the norm for businesses.
So last time we talked, everyone was stuck in POC purgatory. And that was probably Q1, late Q1, early Q2 of last year that we talked. How is it looking now? And I'm already through my first in the morning. I need to go get
I like it.
bathe in your veins.
One, the market as a whole is still very much in POC purgatory.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Within our customer base, I think what we saw is companies that are still stuck in POC purgatory, and then companies that have leaned in aggressively. So there's sort of already this emerging have and have-nots in AI. And so I think what we saw is some leaders getting spooked and saying, this isn't valuable enough, there's not a thing here. And then others saying, wow, this is the moment, right? This is almost the moment I've been waiting for. And all the things I always hoped could be possible in my business are now not just possible, but I can make them happen. And so even if I don't have the people, the AI expertise, or any of those pieces, the technology is here, and I can partner with a group like Tribe to go make these things happen. Yeah. And so there have been a bunch of organizations, many projects that we've worked on that have gone to production, that are fully in market, customer facing, as well as internal applications.
Oh, wow.
And I think that energy really happened in sort of the second half of the year. And it's also what the market needs to start fueling more activity. So we went POC, mania into this kind of like trough of disillusionment because everyone, it's easy to say that AI has no value if you built something that didn't actually have value. And, you sort of declare that that's true about AI. And so now that we have these stories of real value that has been delivered through AI, that is what's going to refuel and reaccelerate the activity. For me, this is like the moment, I don't even think it's started yet, but where we're going to see this other inflection point in AI activity, and where the conversation won't be, what are you doing about AI or what's your AI strategy? But hey, I'm on the board of this other company and they're seeing insane gains, revenue per employee is going up, whatever. In one case, 73%. What are you doing, right? Get super specific, much more data-driven. You're holding companies accountable in a new way with real benchmarks.
Yeah. What was that unlock? Was it a new set of vendors that came in to help with actual value-added tools? Was it that people were able to use what had been there and actually create real value from it in ways they hadn't before? What was there an unlock or any surprises in there last year?
I think it took real commitment from leadership, and I think it took a little bit of patience.
This is so interesting, though. It wasn't a technical hurdle.
There was not a technical hurdle. I think that what is happening, and one of the really interesting dynamics is that the tech is only getting better and the cost is only coming down. And so this only gets more attractive for everyone. So I think there are companies that have stuck through it before some of those inflection points happened, believing and having the conviction to actually make real bets. And to me, that's the difference. Now, you can't make bets without seeing any value. Like that's kind of how you get into these really bad situations that I think would be really negative for the industry. There's an example that I can think of with a customer, leading company in sort of the security space. The first idea that we worked on for them, it worked, but it wasn't that interesting. And it was through that iteration that our team was able to see, hey, actually, there's this other set of data that might be able to unlock real value for your users. And so, and that's ultimately what we then ended up leaning all in on and investing in. And, at AWS reInvent recently, we stood on stage with them and Anthropic, and, talked about all the features we had released to market. Their salespeople are demoing them, at their booth. And these things are now real, where not only were they theoretical before, they weren't even the idea the company had, right? It took that experimentation to actually find what was the real unlock. And so, it could have been easy for them to say, hey, actually, the results of that first kind of project weren't that interesting. We're done.
As a founder, how do you flip that? Because that's a very real issue that so many people run into, is like, we went down this path that didn't work.
Yep.
We're done. Versus we went down this path, like, what do we know now? How do you navigate that?
This is why people are hiring Tribe, is you're not getting consultants, you're getting technologists. It's cheesy, it's true though. Like, at the end of the day, like why were we able to have that unlock? It's not because we were amazing business strategists. Right. It's because an amazing technologist, yeah, cool. But a really talented technologist saw something in the data and connected it with the technical opportunity. Like that is the stuff that companies in many cases, aren't able to do on their own. And so it's that understanding of the technology and the ability to actually leverage best-in-class product development skills. So rapid testing, sort of user testing, all of these pieces that might not be shocking to you. It was shocking to me. Some of the most impressive companies that I think of, even in AI, but certainly in tech, aren't operating that way. Yeah. And so if you connect these things together, you're actually able to do incredible things. Why are you smiling?
Because I love it. I just think it's so non-obvious. I mean, it's obvious in hindsight, but like most of the people who are trying to deploy these tools, they fundamentally don't understand them, but they understand they have a problem they're trying to solve with them. And so to pair them with someone who actually knows both the data, they know the underlying infrastructure, and their realm of possible is just so much bigger, and their understanding of possible is so much bigger. And so to expect someone being exposed to these things for the first time to like see through all of it that's a big ask.
And then on top of it, this is all we do.
Yeah.
So we're building hundreds of these AI products across companies with focus on mid-market and enterprise. Yeah. And so those patterns, like every project we do makes us more valuable to the next person who hires us. Yeah. Right? Whereas if you're a company and you're building, you get the benefits of building something successfully, that you get to sort of scale it across your organization. But the path to getting there is really hard because you don't have those iteration cycles and you don't have the scale.
Okay. All right. Are we done with the Tribe infomercial?
I'm so done. Never done. Never done. Always be selling.
The vendor landscape. I mean, the names that come to mind that we talked a lot about were OpenAI, Microsoft. We kind of touched on Anthropic, but honestly, not a whole lot. Like the universe of vendors and the universe of people that were making real progress was seen relatively low. What's that vendor landscape happened, and were there any surprises to you in terms of dark horses or new entrants that really knocked your socks off?
A lot has changed, and I think that there will be continued disruption in this landscape. The thing I think we can feel pretty confident in today is that this is not going to be a winner-take-all market. And thank goodness for that.
What do you mean when you say that?
AI won't be entirely controlled by only OpenAI, right? OpenAI is an incredible company. they catalyzed this AI boom. The lead was so great because they became like Kleenex, right? They became associated with AI. But probably the biggest thing that's changed is that Anthropic, which was the number 2 at the time, has just really shown that they can play. I felt they were really strong technically. I thought they had a differentiated value prop. So I thought there was like a really interesting business there. But I think what they showed is they can go toe to toe on product innovation, and they could be best in class on technical advances. So, and everyone's one-upping each other constantly, but they're fully in the game where they are at times the leading model on the market.
Leading in what sense?
Like the most powerful, the model yielding the best results. Okay. For every project we build, we're constantly doing evaluations across models. OpenAI performance at first was the obvious winner, but cost was much higher. And so the value prop for other models, Anthropic, Cohere, Mistral, et cetera, was a lot on cost, and sort of having trade-offs on the output, the accuracy, the cost, and security and privacy. These are sort of some of the dimensions. What Anthropic really tipped the scales on is that they could be the best, and they could have a sort of cost advantage as well. And so that has kind of changed the game, where I think that models will continue to improve. There will continue to be, hopefully, step function changes in these releases, but companies are going to be used to, and a big part of AI product development is going to be constantly evaluating different model providers, whereas before you could have seen a world where there was a lot more lock-in on these model providers. And I think that hasn't happened in large part, I believe, because of the innovation from companies like Anthropic and because there is such high competition. And as long as that continues, there's a lot of pressure on innovation. And I think that keeps the game really interesting. And it also means that outcomes on the products that are built can really be determined by your ability to move between these different model platforms and use different models for different use cases, et cetera, as those sort of paths become more clear. So one example is right now, Anthropic is just taking off with developers. Yeah. Sonnet 3.5 plus Cursor is just an amazing combination. Yeah. Developers love it. It's a clear kind of winning choice. And if you have an area that has such growth and such pickup, that becomes really compelling. But, if there are improvements in other models, developers are going to switch. And so I actually think that's both a challenge for these companies, and it's an opportunity for the market. And
is that
maybe
a fundamentally new dynamic?
I think it's completely a new dynamic.
Zero lock-in, or relatively no lock-in or loyalty.
I mean, the narrative from these companies is very much that I think analogous to cloud. The narrative from the sales team at an OpenAI or an Anthropic is, sure, you could be multiplayer, multi-cloud, model, but you're going to need a primary. And I think that's a really good pitch. I don't know how that plays out yet. I think what's clear is there's not as much lock-in as people would want there to be. People meaning those model companies.
So yeah,
there's been an evening of the playing field, which I think makes things super interesting. And then at the kind of hyperscaler level, the Microsoft and AWS and Google, there's a lot of moving stuff there as well. Over the last period, I think OpenAI and Microsoft that had been, best buddies became more frenemies. I don't feel that's happened yet with AWS and Anthropic, but at reInvent, AWS launched and announced their own large language model. So it's only a matter of time, but those are also fascinating dynamics where they collaborate, they co-sell, they invest in one another, and they sell against each other. Yeah. And those dynamics are going to be fascinating.
Pull it forward. What's your prediction? What happens between these frenemies now?
I think OpenAI and Microsoft will directly compete in the next year, openly. I think today they are directly competing, intensify, and I think that that will probably be the pattern with Anthropic and AWS as well. And so for us, our value and the way we look at the market is there's a lot of value in being agnostic. And so the ability to play nice with all of these partners. And so, today we can partner with AWS and Anthropic on a deal, on a customer. Over time, we might be working with AWS on a customer and Anthropic on a customer, in the same way that we already would approach Microsoft with a customer and OpenAI as a customer, rather than that combination.
Got it. Now, one thing that we touched on a little bit last time we talked that became a lot more pronounced in your own business was like the role of private equity and all this stuff. How did that evolve last year?
I think the last time we spoke, I was thinking about private equity as a really interesting channel for us to, grow and scale. And that has played out in droves. So there's a way to look at our business, which, looks at sort of these partnerships that massively accelerate our distribution. And private equity is certainly one of them. If I take a step back from just our go-to-market, which is probably less interesting to other people, but very interesting to me.
Not at all. Not at all.
But if I take a step back from that, I would say that, one of the interesting dynamics, and I'm probably biased on this because I spent so much time in the venture and startup world, is that there's so much talk about the role of venture capital and AI. And there's so much funding going into this market. And I think that, maybe the thread people aren't seeing yet that I believe will be massively valuable over the next whatever period of time is the role of private equity in AI. And we are seeing the reason it's been such an exciting channel of growth for us is that we are seeing private equity firms lean in massively on AI. And so that means initially building AI features and products into their companies, so into companies they've already invested in, such that these companies can become more valuable. Right. The reason that was always interesting is, unlike a startup that has no data and distribution yet, these companies do on both of those dimensions have a really strong advantage, and yet their technical capabilities are much worse. So if you compare that with a partner like Tribe, the thesis or bet was that you could create incredible outcomes. Right. And that is playing out in a really meaningful way. And I think that these are the success stories that will only accelerate work in this world, because like venture, private equity is also a very tight insular community where everyone kind of looks to one another. And so once there's success kind of somewhere, that's something that becomes a very replicable motion. What gets even more interesting than adding AI to existing companies is how they approach net new investments. So as they see real value delivered across customer support, engineering, cost takeout opportunities internally, product innovation, extensions, leveraging specific types of data, they can start to, as they look at net new companies, underwrite AI. Not just, today it would be like in that upside scenario, but over time that should become the base case. And so for private equity firms that are really leaning in on for their portfolio AI innovation, that's feeding the deal process, which will only create even more interesting outcomes and opportunities from private equity. And so for a class of investing that I think has been less associated with innovation, certainly tech innovation, compared to venture, I think that there's like a real interesting narrative shift there, where private equity has the potential to be creating massive AI outcomes.
Has the nature of those engagements changed at all, or kinds of companies? I know last year was mostly like taking our software companies, like these were technical companies that these private equity firms owned. They were trying to come up with new products. They were trying to come up with new ways to be efficient. The thing that seems to be in the zeitgeist now, when VCs and startups think about applying AI to private equity, it tends to be like, let's find the accounting firm. Let's do an accounting firm roll up. And then we're going to like fire all the accountants and use AI instead.
I think the roll-up strategy is one of the funniest things happening in investing right now, because it's venture meets private equity.
Yes.
And I actually see venture investors getting the most excited about that.
Very excited.
So
That's
it's
why I'm bringing it out,
the-
because
that's the hot thing right now. And
take a
like,
boring
you
business,
know,
slap AI on it.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that like that's very much not the exciting stuff I'm seeing in private equity yet. I think the exciting part, like that's an interesting play. I think, we'll see how that plays out. And I think those companies have the same challenge. Like we've even seen venture funds, large venture funds, build their own, call it like internal tribe to go do this at companies that they go aggregate or invest in. So let's say a more private equity-like play within a venture fund that's investing in these large public companies, and then doing the AI work to go, innovate on them. I think we'll see if these things are successful. I have not yet seen success cases there.
Okay.
So I am healthily...
It's like the most non-answer
I am
answer.
healthily skeptical. How about that?
I like this.
I think where I have seen value is working with really large businesses. So in the private equity landscape, there's a distribution. There are lots of small companies, and then there are some massive household name companies. And we have seen like where we're having the most success is a few profiles of companies. One, I think the attribute that sort of sticks out is they tend to be larger businesses. And then I think there are two groups within that. One is the non-technical companies, so the opposite of what you mentioned, who like believe they have a vision, but no means to make it happen. And we're seeing really exciting things happen there. And then on the other hand, there are the companies that are software-enabled businesses. We work with Francisco partners and Vista equity partners. They traditionally invest in software businesses, but these aren't, venture-style software businesses. And so they have technical talent, but AI might still be a gap for them. Or they have some AI expertise, but it's not, quite what we have at Tribe. Or where their value prop is just acceleration. Hey, what we're doing is working. Like put fuel on the fire. We can't move fast enough. Right. So I think that is true for private equity in general. It's also true for corporates. So we are working with trillion-dollar tech companies where they have, the best AI talent in the business, but where, you have, in some cases, a skill gap in particular areas, or in other cases, something is working and they want to go, cannot move fast enough, and you are providing acceleration. And both of those strategies work really well.
Anything else about last year you want to talk about that we haven't hit?
There was really only product market fit in like 3 places.
Which were
so ChatGPT, and then like the enterprise extensions. Number 2 is customer support. There's been a lot of chatter here. I think
it seemed like there was a rush of startups going into.
There was a rush of startups, but also demand is essentially unparalleled. Like I just think that this is true product market fit.
Is that something people are building with external tools themselves, or are they looking for a vendor to just say, I want to?
Truly both.
Really?
And I think that this is an area where both win for a long time.
Interesting.
So Sierra and Salesforce, and Salesforce is a company that kind of wasn't in the game and is now in the game with Agentforce. Meaningfully. They've had some really big releases and lots of really interesting innovation on the business model side. And then at the same time, we've seen some massive investments from companies like Klarna and others that are doing their own custom builds, and they're seeing tremendous results.
Do you have any visibility into every scaled founder I know is looking at Klarna?
Because they're the most
baffled.
vocal.
They're so vocal about it, but they've tried to duplicate it and they can't see how what they're saying they're getting.
First of all, you should connect me with those companies.
For sure.
So you're in the doghouse. I think there is skepticism. again, healthy skepticism because the numbers are so extreme and because they've been so vocal and because there's some inconsistency in some of the things.
Yes, I think that's the thing
right.
that's
So one
great
example is, they did this whole thing about how they haven't hired a new person in whatever, over a year. Meanwhile, they have like a bazillion job recs open. I think they're just confusing. There's some confusing messaging happening.
Very European.
But I think the short answer is there are other examples of tremendous value, ServiceNow being another example of that.
Sure.
And to me, those are two examples of we've made tremendous AI investments. They essentially have their own AI labs. And they have the team of Tribe like at their company.
Wow.
So ServiceNow acquired a big AI company. Klarna has a ton of this talent in-house. And so I do think that there is truth to the potential and to the gains. And also companies are trying to figure out how to reap those rewards. And I think that many who aren't ready to make these massive investments. Again, it depends how much this service is a part of your business. So I think that's another piece. This isn't right for everyone. That there are others who are doing large implementations with a Sierra or with Salesforce. And we have those customers as well. And we're seeing actively the results of those. So I think this is the next year where that goes from, hey, we had some really interesting data to much clearer paths to value and repeatability. But this is a clear area of product market fit. And then the third is all around code generation and code automation. This is another massive narrative inversion where engineers and tech have always been the highest on the totem pole, where we're seeing augmentation and tooling that can automate parts of their workflow. And I think that's for the engineers in Tribe, that's celebrated. That's the most exciting thing. They are all adopting it. In enterprise, that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing hey, it's so clear this is working. There isn't a project where we're not leveraging tooling.
But you're leveraging
bring it to market. Absolutely.
Okay.
But our customers are still struggling to figure out how to reap, similar to customer support, how to reap those rewards for themselves.
Okay.
And I think one of the challenges is that engineers have been really revered. And if you look at adoption within these organizations, you see that it's actually the kind of junior and mid-level engineers are adopting it just fine. It's kind of the more senior or tenured engineers that aren't. One, they need to see the value, and two, it's a real culture shift. And so there's a real people component on both the customer support and engineering side, I think even more powerfully on the engineering side.
Any lessons from navigating that culture shift for you at Tribe, and then anyone you've seen do it well? Is there a through line for any of them?
There is. I think it's going to take a lot more hand-holding to get through this trough. Google, as an example, came out saying that 50% of their code is generated through CodeGen. So
that's incredible.
50, half of all code they produce is leveraging these tools. And I think that is a beacon, because these are the most technical, sophisticated engineers that are getting value out of these tools. And so there's a very clear path. I think my team would probably say the same thing. Now the challenge is, okay, how do we crack that in some of these more corporate environments? And how can we be a partner to the CEOs, the CTOs, the VP of engineering, and in really making this real? And how can we actually show the lift that this is adding? How can you get more surgical around what this actually means for their organization?
I think what's interesting to me about big swaths of this conversation so far are the technology is there, but so many of the hurdles that need to be overcome to really take advantage of it are people things. It's culture thing. When you're talking about those things, it's these things are here, they're effective. The issue in adopting them isn't actually the technology at all. It's the people and the culture and the biases that people have, or the way they've worked historically.
I think it's both. And the reason is that it's like the POC purgatory. If you use a tool and it's only so-so today, it's really easy to dismiss. And so if you also add in the people component where it's like all of your incentives are to be protective and defensive, then yeah, of course, then the technology gives them an opportunity to say, to point to, like, this isn't helpful to me, this isn't valuable. Cool that Google's getting that. It doesn't work for us. I think you're right, though. It's both. And I think that while there's very clear, when I say product market fit, I mean there's very clear demand, and these are really interesting use cases that majority of companies need. I think the theme for next year, certainly for Tribe, is figuring out how to make that repeatable such that companies can actually get the value themselves. And have these playbooks that we can be scaling across organizations.
It's an interesting, switch that kind of flipped kind of mid to end of last year, where suddenly you're having like these, one, you have Palantir ripping.
Yep.
You have, a lot of kind of service forward companies that people are now looking at and seeing a non-service multiple applied to them. You're starting to see a lot of like VCs and tech people actively looking for investments in this kind of software and a service world.
I think that's right. If you go only based on my inbox, inbound from investors has gone up significantly. And I think that it's more around this zeitgeist shift. I had a conversation with an investor last week that was saying, now that we've seen some of these things, and they pointed to the examples you mentioned, they also pointed to companies like Scale AI and a few others. They said, okay, well, now we're actually pretty open to the idea that there are massive companies that can be built that look different than what we've seen in the traditional SaaS model. And then at the same time, they've also been investing in these SaaS businesses, and they're seeing the challenges with adoption. And so that, when our growth, is sort of looks more like that hockey stick, and these companies don't.
Growth look like a hockey stick?
It does. It'll continue. Steeper the better. I think that gap is narrowing, and there's a lot of kind of reframing there. There are a few dimensions to this, but one is there's deep need for companies to have way more support than any of these platforms can provide today in solving these problems. That is very much where Tribe is playing, and we're coming in and really helping companies make the potential of AI real in their company, whatever that means for them. We're also building tech to enable services. And as you also look at investment into the space, there's no way that services businesses will be built. The future will be built the way they have. And so there's also a ripe category for tech-enabled service models beyond AI as well, where, I think about private equity. When we have a private equity firm that's looking at a tech-enabled services business and investing in one of them or has a portfolio of them, not only can we advise those companies on the things that we're doing with customers, but also the ways we're leveraging AI to change and automate our own business.
Yeah. I think that your focus as enterprise AI is I'm sure you've found different ways to articulate it over the years, but it's become a much more crisp focus for you.
The short answer on how I think about it is that we are helping accelerate, I hate this term, from innovation consulting and cloud transformation, but our job is to drive AI transformation. So actually reinvent these businesses leveraging AI.
You really mean it. I
really mean it. And the reason I do is because I have CEOs that say to me, hey, I have this massively successful business, $500 million on my balance sheet of all these incredible things. But if I were to start this company again, there's no way it would look like what it looks like today. And how do I take where I am and actually really build AI into the DNA of this company so that we can compete at this next level, so that we can maintain or grow our relevance. And that's a fascinating question. How do you do that? And we're that's going to be such a journey for these companies that if there are areas where companies can buy solutions, we want to help them make the right decisions on buying those solutions so that we can focus on building in the most critical areas. I don't want to solve a problem that's already been solved That's not a good use of our time or resources. We want to go have the most impact we can. And I sort of view that as a long journey with these customers where we're also continuing to build trust by helping point them in the right direction and leverage our expertise to do that across a wide set of challenges, and where we also can be the strategists and builders. But part of that strategy is what you build, what you buy as well.
I think that's still an open question. Like, are the non-AI native companies just fundamentally screwed when an AI native company comes along?
I think if you look at even just code gen, you've sort of the Googles who are getting 50% code. I think you have every startup saying, hey, 50 to 80% of my code is being generated by these tools. And so I think about how fast some of these startups can accelerate in a world where they can actually just compress years off of the development cycle of some of these tools. And so I think that, the game is on. And I think the savvier companies, the savvier boards are making real investments because they see the pressure from all sides, from hyperscalers that can continue to sort of, bleed into their markets, and from the up and comers.
So if you can't get out of POC purgatory, you're actually just stuck in purgatory as a business.
I think that the cycles on innovation are greatly compressing. The technology is accelerating massively. And so if you don't start investing now, you are going to get left behind.
What are the themes you're thinking about going into 2025?
I think there's only one word that customers say right now, almost comically so, and it's agents. I even had my cousin, who is deeply non-technical, works at a big company, say, well, we're not doing AI. I mean, we're really doing just agents. Okay.
What do people mean when they say that?
And well, I don't think they know. To be clear, what they actually mean is AI this is what will change in the next year, is one, has already been true but needs to become realized, is efficiency. And then I think the other is the other word is workflow. So, what is AI good for today? Completion of tasks. This is sort of completion of workflows. So stitching together multiple steps. And this is where you start seeing really interesting things happening. So Anthropic has their computer use product that they've kind of, released a video on. It hasn't really come to market. OpenAI now is putting out a lot of kind of competitive collateral around theirs. This is the move for all companies, whether it's off the shelf or custom, building discrete agents that can automate full workflows, that can collaborate with team members. Where we are today working human to agent, eventually it becomes agent to agent. And this is where you're going to see, I believe, massive cuts across companies. There's going to be a refactoring of how work is done, and where you're really starting to unlock the promise of AI for companies, and also where things are going to get a lot more quantitative.
Do you think we'll start to see those cuts in 2025?
If the first few weeks of 2025 are any guide, Meta announced a massive cut just this week, and they say it's to gear up for this next era. There will be a rebuilding of people that just look different than some of the people they have.
What do you think the people look like that succeed in this next phase?
I think the number one thing is the openness to leveraging the technology. So I think more than anything, it's so controllable. It's attitude. It's, are you going to fight against this thing, or are you hungry to learn? Are you eager to figure out how to leverage the tools for your own individual workflow, such that you can be viewed as part of the solution rather than part of the problem that we're solving with AI? I think that is the number one thing. And then, beyond that, of course, there are for sure skills and skill gaps that exist in organizations today. I really think even before you get there, there's just a real divergence in openness. And I think that, companies are going to need to be on this train. I don't think it's optional. And so fighting is just a bad strategy.
Do you see that in your engagements, that polarity of all in, curious, exploring, open, and I don't even want to think or talk about this.
Yeah, even within a certain company, we'll segment off groups of people within organizations that are more open or have more of the skills, and we'll bring them into our pods, and we'll go create this like massive AI acceleration. But we're doing that because otherwise we get really slowed down by these groups of people that are just going to be fighting against us.
So if you're a new if you're a person new to this, where are you finding people most productively starting with these tools to kind of start reorienting themselves and their lives around them?
So on the company side, I think the most obvious question that anyone should be asking in interviews is, what tools are you leveraging today to automate and augment your work for any function?
What are the tools you're...
Gosh, so many. But like that has to be the answer. And if the answer is just ChatGPT, like, sorry, it's not good enough. And so I do think there's like a hungriness, like a excitement and energy. And I don't think it needs to, I can think of a company where legacy company, you've never heard of it, not the most innovative technical solution, but their CTO is just obsessed with AI. And he talks about after his kids go to bed, he's up late experimenting, trying all the tools. He's pushed his company to be really aggressive on AI. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. It's really like, that's why I say like that attitude, that energy, like that's what organizations need. I mean, that's like a lot of what we can create is that catalyst, but there are people within these organizations who can play a role of catalyst and who are going to become more valuable to those organizations.
When you engage with a company, do you try to bring them up that learning curve in their personal lives?
Absolutely.
Oh, interesting.
So, one of our value props is, hey, like have your talent pair with us. They're going to learn through that process. In less personal lives, but but really see the value, right? That it needs to be a change from, this is something that like I'm nervous about or that could be a risk for me, to this is something that makes my work, gives me leverage, that sort of adds value to me in some way and therefore makes me better at my job. I get a better performance review. Right? It's the same thing with Tribe. I want to go get every one of my customers promoted, right? Or I want to keep the CEO really happy.
Agents are the big trend of 2025. What has to happen for that to be real?
I think one of my favorite words that I heard from a customer is like, I want a factory of agents. I want to be able to spin up hundreds, thousands of these things. I want to be able to go from automating one workflow to automating tons of workflows across every function, right? I want to massively streamline my organization, and that does not exist. That is a deep need right now. What we've built at Tribe is the ability to do that for ourselves. We're using ourselves as the tester, and then as that becomes one, we can go build agents today, but we're building a platform on which we can spin these things up so that we can create factories for and with our customers.
Is there an agent workflow that would be comparable to code gen or customer service that you're, in your conversations is like incredibly high demand, kind of obvious use case?
I don't think it's happened yet.
Okay.
And I think that's the fun part. Still, depending on size and type of company, I think engineering is still going to be a top. I think customer support is also going to be a top, but it's getting more solved. I think that really what comes next is something like marketing. Massive cost driver for companies. A problem where if you actually nail optimization, you have meaningful changes in economics. Both on spend, but more importantly, ROI. And where today it's really manual, time intensive, and people intensive. And so how can you both massively increase the throughput and output and value created by this team? And also how can you do it with less time? And I think that's an example where we're seeing massive product market fit. We've automated our content creation for Tribe. When I talk about that with companies, they're like, please do that for us, please. Okay. There's an example of a company where we're building a brand voice LLM for them so that they can then start doing all of these incredible things on top of it. And so you could sort of think of it as like a platform on which we'll be able to build multiple marketing agents. What is the foundation that you need to then then be able to build these workflow automations on top of it.
Just trying to sound like a software company and not a services company.
The line is going to be very fuzzy.
So 2025 is going to be all these buckets that are clearly defined. The lines are going to start to blur.
I think they've already started to blur. I think that as I look to 2025, I think there will be true value generated from AI. That value has already generated and created a lot of jobs. OpenAI and Anthropic are scaling like crazy, as one example. Cursor is one of the fastest growing companies, right? There's tons of examples of these companies that are runaways, that are hiring people like crazy. I think there's a refactoring of companies. There's like that's sort of how I interpreted the meta news is, okay, we're going to scale down the team to then scale back up and just scale back up differently. And so how do we just reset on what it is that we need as an organization for this next chapter? And I think that that is something I imagine happening across the board, as well as teams that actually can, per the Klarna announcement, go longer periods of time with the team they have while getting massively more throughput from those teams.
I love it. Anything else on 2025 you want to talk about, or anything like interesting? Yeah, it's always like a funny.
You don't really have time.
I don't. Yeah, that's true.